the elders happen to be visiting Egypt at the moment. They've been set up by Nelson Mandela, try to get out into the world, use their moral authority to tackle some of the more intractable problems of this world and some of the conflicts that are taking place in this world. And I just happen to have a surprise for you all tonight. And we have somebody here who's going to join us on stage, who I think is, perhaps arguably the most remarkable person alive today, and what he's achieved in his lifetime, and he's, I think, only 1 year from being 90 years old, is absolutely extraordinary. And he's also done an awful lot for Egypt over the years. And I just thought maybe you could welcome President Carter. Thank you. I think it's fair to say that he's one of the few people in this world who has stayed faithful to the Palestinians. One of the few Americans in this world who stayed faithful to the Palestinians. But I think if you first of all go back in history a little bit to when Egypt and Israel was at war, I'd love to have a history lesson from you direct, and what happened then, and what happened, how you managed to bring peace in that situation.
Well, I want to say first that Richard Branson is a hero of mine. He's a businessman that has a good time, and he improves the life of millions of people at the same time. And I think he's the only one that I know that can do that. So to get back to the peace agreement, when I became President of the United States, Israel and Egypt had been at war 4 times in just 25 years. And I was determined to bring them together if possible. And luckily, I had a very courageous and generous man who was the best friend I ever had among the heads of state, that is Anwar Sadat. And he came to Camp David. He only wanted 2 things. One is peace for his own people and justice and independence for the Palestinians. And so in the Camp David Accords, we got both those things agreed by Egypt, by Israel, and by the United States. Since then, the peace agreement between Israel and Egypt has been honored. Not a single word has been violated now in 33 years. But Israel has never carried through with their commitment to the Palestinians. And so my remaining goal is to make sure that all the Israelis are out of Palestine and the Palestinians have their own country. Living side by side with a peaceful Israel and a peaceful Egypt. So that's what I dream about in the future, and if I live a few more years, maybe I and Richard and the elders can help bring that about.
The peace treaty that you feel is the correct one is to go back to the 1967 borders.
The 1967 borders respected by the United Nations, by the United States, by the European community, by Egypt, and also by Israel at one time. And if there needs to be some modifications of a 1967 borders, very minor, just 2 or 3% of the land, then Israel would have to give the Palestinians an equal amount of land. And one of the things that I think would be nice would be to have a land corridor to connect Gaza with the West Bank, so that the Palestinians can have a railroad and a road connecting Gaza and the West Bank. And so that would be what we hope to have in the future. But Israelis withdraw from occupied territories and let the Palestinians have their own land.
The elders, would you mind just talking briefly about the elders and explain why you're involved with the elders?
Well, Richard is very modest, but there wouldn't be elders if it weren't for Richard Branson. And we have now 10 members of the elders, plus Nelson Mandela, who's always there to give us advice, although he's not able to travel anymore. But at this particular meeting, we had the former president of Finland, Martti Ahtisaari, who won the Nobel Peace Prize, as you know, last year. We had Mary Robinson, the former president of Ireland, who was the first United Nations High Commissioner on Human Rights after she left her office. We had Gro Brundtland, the former Prime Minister of Norway and the first woman Prime Minister of Norway, who after she left her office headed up the World Health Organization. We had Lakhdar Brahimi, who is now in charge of trying to bring some peaceful movements in Syria. He was the chief negotiator, as you probably know, for the United Nations. But Kofi Annan. Kofi Annan is from Ghana. He was also helping with Syria, and he was the Secretary General of the United Nations. We had Ella Bhatt. Ella Bhatt is a very small Indian woman who has cared for about 2 million women workers in India. And she's the conscience of the elders. She always tells us what to do to help poor people, what to do to help working people, what to do to help women have an equal life. That's the kind of group that we have. And we have an option to get 1 or 2 more in the future, but I think that describes to you the kind of group we have. When people ask me in my own country, what are the elders, I say, well, it's a bunch of political has-beens. We have had very high offices. We never are going to run for office again. And that gives us, as you might know, a great deal of knowledge about the world, a great deal of experience in the background. But we go where we wish, we meet with whom we choose, and we say what we really believe. And not all politicians can do that.
When I talk to President Carter, the things he's done in his life and is still doing are just extraordinary. Education throughout the world, he devotes a lot of his time. Health around the world, conflict resolution around the world, and so it goes on. I'm going to just ask him whether he could choose one that he's most proud of, if that's possible.
Well, the Carter Center works very closely with the Centers for Disease Control. I heard you mention them.
I forgot sort of monitoring to make sure that elections are fair, and so it goes on. Sorry.
Well, as a matter of fact, the Ethiopian election is the 92nd election that we've helped people have. And we have a very wide-ranging program at the Carter Center. We have programs in 73 different countries. 35 of them are in Africa. And we try to minister to the poorest and most needy people on earth. What we do primarily is concentrate on diseases that the World Health Organization called neglected tropical diseases. And these are diseases that no longer exist in Egypt. They no longer exist in Europe. They no longer exist in Japan or the United States or China. But they afflict hundreds of millions of people still in Africa. And they're diseases like river blindness and guinea worm and lymphatic filariasis and schistosomiasis and trachoma. Trachoma is the #1 cause of preventable blindness. And that's what the Carter Center does. We go into the villages in the jungle and in the desert areas and take medicine and put it in the mouths of people. And I'm very, very proud of that. We work with an organization called Habitat for Humanity. We build homes for poor people who never have had a decent place to stay. And last year, my wife and I went with a group of volunteers to Haiti, and we built 100 homes in 5 days. And we're going back next month, and we'll build 100 more homes in the center of the earthquake that took place in Haiti. So we do that every year, and next November will be the 29th year my wife and I have helped to build homes with a lot of volunteers. We know each other pretty well. My wife and I have been married now 66 years, and we're still getting acquainted, so we have a good life.
Something that President Carter and I have been working on for a lot longer than I, is trying to tackle the war on drugs. I think both of us feel that the war on drugs has failed, and the current war is doing a lot of damage in this world. We have a 55-minute film which nobody in the world has seen yet. It's a documentary film about the war on drugs.
This film was made by 8 leaders of the world, 4 presidents and others, led by former president of Brazil, Cardoso. And they have seen that in the last 30 years, too much money has been spent on putting people in jail and also bombing and setting fire on crops of people in countries that grew some coca, for instance. And the whole thrust of this film is that has not worked, and that we need to do something different in all the countries to do away with drugs. And that's by not putting people in jail if they have a small possession of a small amount of, say, marijuana. And the alternative has worked. And they show in very important countries, like in Portugal and Switzerland and Sweden, that when they try something different, It really works. And so I think you'll see this a very dramatic film to give you a new insight on how to do away with or reduce dramatically the threat of drugs becoming addictive and killing the spirit of particularly young people. So it's a very interesting film. I would urge you to take 50 minutes and watch it.
Well, thank you very much, President Carter. Thank you, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you so much. It's such an honor. I can't tell you. Thank you so much.
I will. Come, I'm not going to shake your hand.